Good morning and welcome to this edition of San Diego People. I'm Elizabeth Alvarez. As technology evolves and advancements are made around us, more and more people are becoming more concerned about their privacy, whether it's the surveillance cameras that are down the street from you or facial recognition software on your cell phone. You may find yourself wondering, what can I do to protect myself? Is this okay? Joining me to talk about some of these concerns is the San Diego candidate for City Attorney Corey Briggs. And from Oakland, California, we have the city's Privacy Advisory Commission Chairman, Brian Hofer. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning,
Thank you
Elizabeth.
for coming in.
Thanks.
Now, I know that Oakland is among many cities across the country that are starting to address these privacy concerns from its city-run technology. I want to get to you in just a moment, Brian. But first, Corey, you have been very vocal about your concerns with this type of technology. Specifically, let's narrow focus and talk about the smart streetlight technology. What is your concern over this?
Yeah, so a couple years ago, the City Council and the Mayor approved a contract to install new streetlights. It was presented as an energy efficiency upgrade. The city would save money, be more environmentally friendly, and it would provide some data to help move cars along and help people park, things of that sort, right? All things that people supported. It turns out that the program was actually so that they can install about 4,000 surveillance cameras on these streetlights. And the fact that there would be surveillance where people are video recorded, they have microphones, the data doesn't just reside there for the police to use to prevent or solve crimes, but it is given to a private company to do whatever it wants with. Mm-hmm. So if you and I are walking down the street, we're recorded, that data goes to a private company. So this is essentially data mining. It's the same sort of thing that Facebook was doing online with Cambridge Analytica, mm-hmm. and it wasn't disclosed to the public. And then we've learned recently that the company behind it, a subsidiary of General Electric, our city attorney owned stock in General Electric. At the time that this was coming up for approval, it was never disclosed. One of the council members who was asked to vote on it, he also owned the same amount of stock. He stood up and said, I'm recusing because I have a financial interest in General Electric. The city attorney did nothing. So
there's a couple of concerns there.
Right, and because of her conflict of interest, the whole contract by law is now called into question. And the reason all this matters is because this could be such a vital tool for preventing crime and solving crime. The police chief is working very hard to do the right thing. But because it was rolled out improperly, thanks in large part to the city attorney's conflict and incompetence, we're now trying to do the right thing with this huge boat anchor, because there are very legitimate privacy concerns that if we'd been transparent about it up front and we'd done what Brian's doing in Oakland, we could have embraced it and done it the right way so that we protect people's privacy while getting all of the benefits on law enforcement. But we didn't do it that way. And it's the city attorney's role to make sure you help law enforcement, you protect the public, and that didn't happen. So we have very serious concerns, and we don't want to lose the good part of this program.
The good part being, tackling crime, as you mentioned and you alluded to. In fact, right now, San Diego police, they're working 160 criminal cases, and they're using this footage. They're going back to that exact place, that exact time. You know the story recently of the security guard at the latest our homeless bridge shelter that was shot and killed. Right. They arrested 2 suspects. They managed to track them down.
That's right. And so we want to give Chief Neslett every lawful tool we can muster to prevent crime, and if we can't prevent it, to solve it, and to solve it quickly. And this is one of those tools if it's done right, but we haven't done right. We're creating all sorts of harm, and worse than that, because we don't even know the full extent of the harm, because the city has no ability to look at the information that's being collected, doesn't know who it's being sold to, doesn't know any of that stuff.
And you know for a fact that it's being sold?
We know that the contract gives the company the right to sell it. The contract itself says that they have the right to sell it. Lawyers don't put things into contracts for no good reason.
Got it. Mr. Hofer, tell me about Oakland. What's going on in Oakland? Similar situation?
Yeah, and I think, if you wanted to give a one-sentence summary of what Corey just said, it's almost like the cover-up is worse than the crime. In Seattle, we saw that their police acquired 3 drones in secret. They didn't need council approval for the contract or funding. And when it was later discovered, it created all this suspicion, and some people actually lost their jobs, and they ended up getting rid of the drones, which is also just a waste of money and time. And in Oakland, they tried to kind of slide a surveillance system through under the radar. That was about $12 million, which for Oakland is a lot of money. And when we discovered it, and it had the same concerns, it's like it can do X, Y, and Z, which we support, but it could also do all these other things. It led to just this really big, very uncomfortable situation between the community and the public. We already have, a very fractured relationship. We have federal monitoring of our police department going into its 17th year. So there's always been that tension there, and to just kind of try to force this type of equipment on people without even having a conversation about it really left a bad taste in our mouths.
So that led to the City of Oakland establishing the commission that you're on, this Privacy Advisory Commission. What exactly do you do?
Yeah, what we really do is we add transparency to the process. We created a public forum to say, let's talk first before we go do this. Reasonable people are going to agree on the public safety benefits and the aspects of this equipment, the utility that we get from it, but maybe we don't collect everything, or maybe we have a shorter retention limit, maybe we don't share it with all the third parties or sell data to private brokers, and then we build a policy around that. So it's very democratic, it's very transparent. I think most policies in the past have always been sort of unilateral decision making by law enforcement. Well, we're not excluding the police from the process at all. We work very closely with them at the Privacy Commission, but we include the public for the first time, and that's been the biggest difference.
I want to ask both of you, how do you respond to those who say, look, if you're not doing anything wrong, what's the problem? Some would say that I feel better that the cameras are on. Police are saying, law enforcement here, saying they're not going back and viewing this footage unless there's a reason for it, unless there's a crime. They're not going back until that day and time of that alleged crime.
Look, it's a good question, but remember, we have to separate the law enforcement component from the private money-making component, right? The surveillance for law enforcement purposes, when there are appropriate restrictions on who has access, when there's proper judicial oversight and transparency, that's legitimate. Nobody's quarreling with that. That's the positive part that Brian was just mentioning. But we did it in a way in San Diego that is allowing a private company to profit off of it. The city has no ability to stop it, short of terminating that contract or having it declared void now that we know the city attorney had a conflict. If that contract's in place, the company gets to do whatever it wants with the data, and it doesn't even have to tell the city of San Diego. That's the problem that we face, because the data gets uploaded to the cloud, and it's those private companies that are connecting all the data points and doing the tracking of people.
And that's your real concern.
And that's the real concern, because people have legitimate concerns about the data mining, the data tracking, and if that becomes what this is all about, we lose the usefulness. Chief Neslet and his officers, their jobs are tough enough as it is. We need to make it easier for them to prevent and solve crimes. And if we take away an important tool because our rollout was illegal and our rollout was dishonest, and the public outcry, which is very legitimate, says stop it because you weren't honest, and if you're not going to be honest, we're going to decide we shouldn't have it. That's not good for public safety. So we've got to get our hands back around this problem, be honest about how we got here, and start taking transparent steps to address the concerns while we preserve the legitimate law enforcement uses.
In a moment, I know we're going to talk about where we go from here, but before we go to break, I want to ask Mr. Hofer, you met with some of our city officials or city office workers here. You're in San Diego. What did they say? What was your conversation like with those in the council?
We had a lot of good conversations. I think council members are definitely receptive. I was particularly thrilled to meet with the chief and his command staff and to realize like the distance between maybe two different positions really isn't that far. That I think this Streetlights is given a good opening to a larger discussion. You know, if it's appropriate to write guidelines for this particular piece of equipment, why not do it for all your equipment? Which also sort of addresses what you just were asking about is, you know, we might have data collected for one purpose that we're all okay with, but then if it's going out the back door to a private vendor, it could be used for a different purpose that we don't approve of. And so if we're never vetting these things during the procurement process, it could really blow up in our face. And so I was really encouraged. You know, they were on board with annual reports to demonstrate how they're using the equipment. They were doing an impact analysis already. They were writing, you know, nice policies. So I don't think the two sides are too far apart.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue the conversation in just a moment. Still ahead here. Welcome back. Today, modern technology ranges from facial recognition to software built on cell phones. And here to explain more about some of the capabilities that these devices have, how they work, and what they may be lacking in terms of a security standpoint is technologist Seth Hall. Joining us here in studio. Seth Hall, good to see you.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. Lilly Irani, a technology expert with UC San Diego. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
All right, I want to start with Seth. Seth, tell us a little bit about, if you could simplify some of the capabilities of these devices, specifically if we narrow focus right now, these smart street lights that we have here in San Diego. How do they work?
The smart streetlights, it's funny that we call them smart streetlights. The lighting portion of them is only a very small part of what they do. Now they collect a lot of environmental data, the temperature of that's in the outside, the barometric pressure, all sorts of environmental data like that. In addition to that, they have cameras on them and microphones. And that's really what we're talking about at this point. Right now, we're recording 24 hours a day video surveillance of the surrounding areas of these streetlights. And we're doing that in, this year, it's about 4,000 of these devices that are deployed throughout the city. And by the end of 2020, the city intends to up that to at least 8,000.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
And these are we're talking about sophisticated technology
That's right.
that continues to evolve.
That's right.
Yeah. Dr. Irani, I want to ask you about, you have actually taken your expertise to the city. You've met with some of our city council offices. What are your thoughts on what we're currently seeing today as a society here in San Diego?
Yeah, I really sympathize with the people who are working in city council trying to manage the city's infrastructures. The smart street lamp system, if we just take that as one example, is incredibly complex. The infrastructure is run by a company called Current by GE. Seth was actually just telling me that where the data is actually stored and where people can get access to it is run by Intel. So you have these complicated relationships between companies that are sharing data, and it's hard to understand as artificial intelligence evolves, as our capacities to process large amounts of data evolve. It's hard for anybody to understand what these technologies we're installing are actually going to be capable of. So I think what could really help City Council that they don't have access to right now are experts who understand computer security, IT auditing, people who are from communities who have a history of being surveilled so that they can bring their experiences of how complicated government agencies combine with the fabric of cultural life to create marginalization and side effects that we actually don't want to see as a city. So we need to have City Council have access to people who can help them interpret these systems and have that debate in public.
Perhaps some sort of a commission.
Perhaps some sort of commission.
Yeah.
A carefully crafted commission where we make sure that the people on the commission don't have conflicts of interest, where they're posed to make money off of the adoption of technologies, and also one where we make sure we have all those forms of expertise I just described, rather than just the people who happen to be interested, so they can be effective.
You know, with these street lights, these smart street lights, Seth, coming back to you, so this information, right, is recorded on this massive database.
Sure.
And it's owned by, what is it called, the GE that company?
Current by GE.
Current by GE. So what is Current by GE doing, or what does Current by GE have the ability to do?
Current by GE takes the data that's collected at each individual node, right? That's the street light, and they take that data up into the cloud, and they run algorithms on it to generate data based off of what kind of images that they're getting. Let me give you an example. If a car drives north on Front Street downtown, and a truck drives south on Front Street in the same place, Current by GE would be able to tell you that that had happened, not because they do that on the device itself, but because they suck up that data into the cloud and run their algorithms on it and produce that kind of information that says a truck drove south at 30 miles an hour and a car drove north.
So who has access to that information? Who would want, how do you gain access to that information that's floating up in this cloud?
Sure. The city has opened up the ability to see those kinds of data points to any developer, software developer who requests access to that data from the city. They're very much hoping that we can find use cases for this that are a boon to the city, either financially via startups or some other mechanism. But otherwise, they also want the citizens to feel like they have access to that data. We do not have access to the video data, however. That is a police-only source of data, and we cannot access the video data, and the police will not provide access to it.
Does this concern you as a technologist when you take a step back from your role of really learning and being the professional who understands how this all works as an individual?
It concerns me on behalf of San Diegans that the city goes forth and deploys this technology with seemingly very little control or even knowledge about what they're doing. They sign these contracts and they deploy all this technology very, very quickly. And when we turn around to start asking questions about what they're doing, there's very few answers. And when I start meeting with people in the community, they have tons of questions, right? Why? Why are you doing this? Am I being recorded? Is it near my house? Is it watching me coming and going? And these are all great questions, but there's nowhere for them to get answers to those questions because the city did not set anything up to accommodate the citizens in this project.
Yeah, going back to you, Dr. Irani, where do you think we should go with this as a San Diego society? I mean, what would you tell continue to tell our city leaders? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been learning from talking to people who are in city council and from the conversations that the wider coalition has been having with police department, different agencies that are responsible, is that we can have a process where we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time we're adopting one of these high-stakes technologies. I'm a professor in the design lab. I've designed technologies. I used to work at Google designing technologies that everyone pretty much uses at this point. And there's a process, there's a set of questions that we know are important to ask about who can access this data, what are the possible harms, how are we going to mitigate the harms, how do we get to the design of a technology that does the thing that we do want while having taken stock of the harms. And so what we're trying to do with the ordinance and what has happened in Oakland and a bunch of other cities in the Bay Area is that they've had success with this ordinance process of having the city kind of almost go through like a workbook process of making sure they're asking the right questions, talking to the right people, and it should make their jobs easier and it should make the technology better for everybody.
Dr. Irani, thank you so much for your expertise. Seth Hall, great to meet you. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to San Diego People. Once again, we're joined by a candidate for City Attorney, Corey Briggs, and the chairman of the City of Oakland's Privacy Advisory Commission. The chairman, Brian Hofer, is back with us to join, to talk a little bit about now where we go in what direction do we go in at this point? And I want to start with you, Brian. If San Diego decides to implement some sort of privacy commission, something similar, what would that mean in general for the surveillance program?
Yeah, so we have a vetting framework. We have 7 ordinances in the Bay Area. We have 13 outside of California that we all typically follow an ACLU model. And of course, it's tailored for every city or county that we're in. But it's really a transparency and a procurement ordinance that requires that you have a public conversation up front before you implement something. And so I think that would have, addressed some of these concerns that we're hearing with the smart streetlights. It's, should they be positioned in front of a cancer doctor's office or in front of a mosque, or what are they actually collecting? Like, we would have asked those types of questions up front. And so by requiring that conversation to occur in public, the community members can weigh in, law enforcement will weigh in, experts will weigh in, and you'll be able to, hopefully find a middle ground. You craft a policy around that, and then you go forward. And with the Privacy Commission there involved as subject matter experts, they can provide feedback to both directions, to both the public and the staff that are proposing to use it, and try to mitigate any concerns. Any tool can be used for good or for bad, so ideally we're going to mitigate or even eliminate any of the negatives that might come from such equipment, and we'll still get the public safety utility out of it.
Are you seeing an impact in your city as it relates to law enforcement jobs, employment?
If you mean, has there been an administrative burden cost?
What's the cost? What's the cost to have a commission?
Yeah, so, we're a volunteer commission. There's staff time because the city comes, staffers come to us, the police, work with us, and other departments as well. It's not just the police. Those are salaried employees. I haven't seen a budget increase for additional staffing. We've got about 4 years under our belt now, and nobody's asked for modifications to the reporting requirements. None of the jurisdictions in the Bay Area have had to seek additional funding to comply. So it's been a very practical, elegant solution to a complicated conversation, and it works. That we're still getting that utility without costing $1 million to try to get there.
Corey Briggs, you're running for City Attorney. You think this is the way we should be going in?
Yeah, I think that you should be transparent in all things that you do at the government. You should be open with the public up front, open with the decision makers. We weren't. We have an opportunity to fix it. And then you need to have a process that ensures transparency and ensures that the public is involved. The ordinance is going to require some work from the city's lawyers.
You're already getting petitions in
yeah,
place.
we have 3,000 San Diegans have already signed the petition wanting us to go in this direction because of the conflict that we talked about in the last segment. The city has an additional thing it needs to do, and that is it needs to get an outside lawyer who's an expert on this, who isn't making money off of Current by GE or any other GE companies, whose interests are nothing but making sure that privacy rights are protected for San Diegans. Get in fresh blood. This isn't a political pitch. This needs to be done now, long before there's a campaign or long before there's an election. But the city can't do what Oakland's done unless it has a legal advisor whose goal, first and foremost, is protecting public safety and protecting San Diegans without regard to her portfolio.
All right, we'll leave it there. Corey Briggs, thank you for coming in. Brian Hofer, thank you so much for taking some time to explain what the City of Oakland is now doing as it addresses these concerns that continue to evolve and that we're very much faced with here in San Diego. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's it for this edition of San Diego People. Join us tonight for the KUSI News at 6, 10, and 11.